that the Court of Quality and Progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we are looking at a lot of amendments right now, and I just want to call your attention to one that I think is really significant. It's one of these things where when people find out about it, they're just outraged that something like this could happen, and something that could be corrected with a very simple amendment. Now, my amendment addresses the 2001 U.S. Supreme Court decision of Zavidas. There, the court held that immigrants admitted to the United States and then ordered removed couldn't be detained for more than 6 months. So something has to happen after a 6-month period. 4 years later, the Supreme Court extended the decision to people here illegally as well, and that's what we're talking about today. As a result, the Department of Justice and Homeland Security have had no choice but to release thousands of criminal immigrants into our neighborhoods. The problem with these decisions is that the criminal immigrants ordered to be removed can't be deported back to their country if that country refuses to issue the necessary travel documents for everyone. In other words, if the country doesn't want to take them back, they don't have to take them back. And yet we have to release them. More importantly, these decisions have a serious impact on public safety, as recent cases have illustrated. 6 years ago, a Vietnamese immigrant was ordered deported after serving time in prison for armed robbery and for assault. Now, he was never removed because this Supreme Court decision handicapped our authorities. Our immigration officials couldn't deport him without the cooperation of the Vietnamese government, which they did not, and his deportation was never processed. Now, this same immigrant, it's Bin Tai Luc, is suspected of killing 5 people in San Francisco in a home in March of 2012. The story of Keon Wu puts this situation in perspective. Keon Wu felt a little safer after the man who had stalked, choked, punched, and pointed a knife at her was locked up and ordered removed from the country. The man, Wang Chen, was a Chinese citizen who had illegally entered the United States, as has been the case of at least 8,500 times in the last 4 years. Mr. Chen's home country refused to let its violent criminal return home. Frankly, you can understand how this could happen, and it did happen. Well, handcuffed by the Supreme Court decision, immigration officials leased Mr. Chen back into the community when they had nowhere else to send him. So that's back into the community here in the United States. As you can imagine, this story also does not have a happy ending. Upon his release in 2010, Wang Chen murdered Keon Wu, the very person that was all concerned during this time, murdered her. As you can see, this is a real problem with serious consequences. There are others like these people out there. According to statistics provided by the Department of Homeland Security, there are many countries that are not cooperating or that take longer to repatriate into their nationals. Countries like Iran, Pakistan, China, Somalia, Liberia, they're on the list. The Supreme Court, in making their decision, says that Congress should clarify the law. So my amendment that I have, it's amendment number 1203, Mr. President, and I think it's going to be voted on in the next short while. At least I hope it will be. That amendment, 1203, does exactly what we need to do by creating a framework that allows immigration officials to detain dangerous criminals, immigrants like Bin Tai Luc and Wang Chen. Specifically, immigrants can be detained beyond 6 months if they're under orders of removal but can't be deported due to the country's unwillingness to accept them back. If several conditions are met, including if the release would, 1, threaten national security, or 2, threaten the safety of the community and the alien either is an aggravated felon or has committed a crime of violence. Now, I understand that the ACLU is scoring against my amendment. I view that as a badge of honor and an additional reason to support my amendment. It seems that the ACLU is only concerned with protecting the rights of criminals, and it's time that we stop this nonsense. And again, Mr. President, all you have to do is go out in public and tell people that we have this situation where we are forced to release these criminals into our society merely because their country won't repatriate them. So anyway, that amendment's coming up, Amendment 1203, and I ask for support of that amendment. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum. Oh, yes, I yield the floor. I withhold my motion.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be lifted if it has been called.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you. I have 9 unanimous consent requests, Mr. President, for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. The Senate's in a quorum call now, waiting for a member to come to the floor. In happenings this morning, media reports say senators have reached an agreement to nearly double federal agents assigned to the U.S.-Mexico border. That requires 700 miles of border fencing along the border and provides funds for drones to patrol the border. The goal is to get more Republican support for the immigration bill so it can pass next week before the July 4th break. And while we wait during this quorum call, here's a discussion on immigration from this morning's Washington Journal.
And now joining us here on the Washington Journal is Representative Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat of New York and a member of the Judiciary Committee. Representative Jeffries, if we could start with where we were talking with our viewers this morning, and I don't know how much of that you heard, but we were talking about the NSA and other issues and asking if there's too much surveillance in the U.S.
Well, that's a legitimate question for the American people to ask. It's a question that we in the Congress should be asking of our government at the executive branch level at this point. There's got to be an appropriate balance between national security interests, and certainly we live in an increasingly dangerous world, and the civil rights and civil liberties and privacy interests that we as Americans cherish. That's one of the things that make us special as Americans, striking that appropriate balance, and we've got to make sure that there has not been government overreach as it relates to surveillance that is not in the best interests of those privacy rights that we think are important to us in this country.
Is this an issue that's been explored at the Judiciary Committee level at all?
We recently had a Judiciary Committee hearing with the outgoing FBI director, where several of the members, including myself, did question Director Mueller on this particular issue. Some of the information is classified and has to be explored in the closed session. But there are legitimate questions to be raised, such as, is it necessary for the NSA and for the government to acquire the phone records and the metadata of every single American over a fixed period of time? What was revealed is 3 months, without any clear indication that the particular phone records are linked to individuals who may be a threat to the United States of America.
Well, also in the Judiciary Committee, another issue you're looking at is the issue of immigration. Where does it stand in the House?
Well, in the House, we have been marking up and reviewing a series of bills that have been presented on the immigration issue with particularized topics. Most recently, yesterday, in the House Judiciary Committee, we marked up a bill related to farm workers, trying to determine what was the appropriate way of filling a clear need for those who help with the food supply in America. Farm workers are individuals who work incredibly hard under incredibly difficult circumstances. I personally believe that we need to create a guest worker program that will provide an eventual path to citizenship while filling the needs of the agricultural industry, but making sure that these workers can operate in safe and in a humane environment.
What do you think of the piecemeal approach that the House Judiciary Committee has taken as opposed to the Senate?
Well, Peter, I think it's a comprehensive approach is clearly what is appropriate at the end of the day. And my preference would be the Senate approach, where we can look at every single aspect of immigration. We've got a broken system, and almost everybody acknowledges that. Clearly, it needs to be fixed. The best way to do it in the most responsible way would be to undertake a comprehensive approach. Now, to the credit of Chairman Goodlatte, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, of course, he's indicated that the piecemeal approach is not designed at the end of the day to perhaps simply address some issues and not others, but that he's come to the conclusion that a sequential approach to raising the different issues that will be important in the context of immigration reform is the manner that he thinks is best at this moment.
Politically, is the Senate bill achievable in the House?
I think the Senate bill is absolutely achievable in the House, and we've seen 3 instances this year where legislation that was passed in the Senate in a bipartisan way, first with the Fiscal Cliff Agreement in early January, second with the Superstorm Sandy relief package that was passed, and then thereafter a strong bipartisan vote in connection with the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women's Act. That work product comes out of the Senate with the support of the President and the American people, lands in the House of Representatives, where leadership, at least in those three instances, has made the decision to allow it for a vote. I think there will be tremendous pressure if you've got a strong bipartisan product that comes out of the Senate for us in the House to take a very close look at it, and particularly given the support of the American people, for it to be given an up or down vote.
Senator Grassley was talking about the immigration bill and the CBO report saying that it would reduce the deficit if passed. I want to get your response to what he had to say.
What the group of 8 said, that they would write a bill that would ensure that the problem doesn't have to be revisited, we find today the Congressional Budget Office thinks entirely different. I may not always agree with CBO. I disagree with the fact that CBO has used dynamic economic effects to score this bill when they don't use it on anything else, yet they refuse to provide the dynamic scoring, particularly on revenue bills. But everyone knows what the CBO says goes. You know, I always say on the Senate floor, CBO's God. You know, they say something's going to cost something, and you want to dispute what they say, you've got to have 60 votes in this body to overturn a point of order against the CBO.
Well, I think that the CBO report provided further evidence as to the need to pursue comprehensive immigration reform. It made clear that in the first 10 years, if the Senate immigration reform bill is to be passed into law, it would result in approximately $175 billion in deficit savings. And then in the second 10 years, I believe, an additional $700 billion in deficit savings. That is consequential. Now, over the first 6 months that I've been in the Congress, I've heard many friends on the other side of the aisle talk about the moral imperative of dealing with the deficit and debt crisis that we have in America. Certainly it is a significant problem. We've got to confront it. We've got to get the economy jump-started and back on track in a manner that's sustainable for the programs that we all care about. One of the ways to clearly do that, as the CBO has indicated, and this is a nonpartisan operation, is to pass comprehensive immigration reform. That provides an additional piece of evidence as to why this is so significant for us to get done, and to get done sooner rather than later.
Congressman Jeffries, what's another issue, before we go to calls, that you focused on or that you think the Congress should be addressing?
Well, I think we also have to deal with the gun violence problem that we have in America. It's a complicated issue, I understand that, but certainly as Americans focused on this problem in the aftermath of the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, it's an issue that we confront in the district that I represent, a very urban district that has several neighborhoods, Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, Coney Island, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, that over the last several decades have experienced significant issues related to gun violence. Almost every weekend when I'm back home, there is another shooting in some part of the district that has resulted from an illegal gun that has been trafficked into Brooklyn or Queens or the city of New York that finds itself in the hands of someone who does harm to an individual or child or senior in the district that I represent. This is an issue, of course, that doesn't just affect urban America, it affects suburban America, as we saw in December of last year. It affects increasingly parts of rural America. We have to deal with it, and I'm hopeful that once we get through immigration reform, the Senate will take another look at the comprehensive background check legislation that had been proposed, as well as other components of the package to deal with the gun violence issue that we have in this country.
And again, politically, do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think we've got to get through comprehensive immigration reform first. That's not to say that the Senate or the House of Representatives can't multitask, but the reality is that when you've got an incredibly complex issue, both from a policy perspective that has political implications that people are thinking through on both sides of the aisle, we've got to do it in sequence. There's momentum right now for comprehensive immigration reform. I'm hopeful that we will get it done in the late summer or early fall, at least certainly in the Senate, with an up or down vote in the House on something comprehensive. And then hopefully at that point we can turn back to dealing with the gun violence issue.
Well, James tweets in, comprehensive is never the way to go. The reason politicians like them so much, comprehensive bills, is that they can sneak all sorts of favors into them.
Well, I certainly understand that some Americans are very cynical whenever you've got a significant bill, hundreds of pages, that provides opportunities for all sorts of amendments and individual members of Congress to insert programs that may benefit their constituents. But with the brokenness of the immigration system that we have, and the fact that the moment in time to deal with this issue comes and goes. The last time we dealt with comprehensive immigration reform in a manner that resulted in legislation, I believe was in 1986 with President Ronald Reagan. And there are many who look back at that effort, and while there were some positive things that were done, believe that not enough occurred to fix the broken system in a manner that has now required us to go back and take another look at it. We've got 11 million undocumented Americans who exist in this country, who are in the shadows. Many of these individuals, the overwhelming majority, hardworking, family-oriented, entrepreneurial, want to be here, want to contribute to America and its continued greatness moving forward. But we've got to take them out of the shadows. We can't ignore this problem. I think people on both sides of the aisle recognize that you can't ignore 11 million undocumented Americans living in this country, and that's why comprehensive immigration reform is important.
Our guest is Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat of New York. He's a member of the Judiciary Committee as well as the Budget Committee. He spent 6 years in the New York State Assembly. He's a lawyer, got his law degree at New York University School of Law after getting a master's at Georgetown and a bachelor's at SUNY Binghamton, and clerked with Judge Harold Baer of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. Did you get to know Judge Sotomayor when she was up there at that point?
I did not get to know Judge Sotomayor well, although I have been present at several speaking engagements that she's had over the years, beginning when she was first appointed to the District Court, and then of course she was elevated to the Circuit Court. She's a phenomenal justice. Of course there's some important issues right now before the Supreme Court of the United States, and we'll see how things turn out over the next couple of weeks.
He's just been elected to his first term in 2012. We've put several issues out on the table. If you'd like to participate in our conversation, the numbers are also on the screen. Martha in Chillicothe, Ohio is a Democrat. You're first up, Martha. Please go ahead.
Hello. Yes, I'd like to speak a little bit this morning about the Bush administration. I think they're still trying to run Bush's world order. Where is his world order standing right now?
Martha, what do you mean by that? Could you give a little more definition?
Well, when he gets up there, and speaks, and he says, "I'm going to have a new world order," and now he's still trying to run the United States and the world, and there's nothing being passed in the Congress or the Senate, and it just seems like it's going their way, but they're all in cahoots together with the Koch brothers investing in the United States. National Geographic will give you the story of the Koch brothers, and it's forming a communist nation is what it's all about.
And they don't like in Chillicothe, Ohio. Representative Jeffries, anything you'd like to say to Martha?
Well, I think there clearly were some implications of the Bush presidency that President Obama is currently dealing with. He's gotten us out of Iraq. He promised that he would do it. He's executed upon that commitment. We're heading out of Afghanistan by 2014. That's another important step forward. Clearly, President Obama inherited a more dangerous world. There's some things that have to be done to deal with the threat of global terrorism that will call into question our ability to provide the same level of freedoms that we've come to expect in America. Things obviously changed when the towers collapsed and those two planes struck us in New York City. But we still have to make sure that those fundamental commitments to privacy, to civil liberties, to allowing Americans to be able to maintain some reasonable expectation of privacy, those are things that continue to be important as well. And I think in the Congress, we're going to have to make sure that the administration and subsequent administrations are striking the right balance.
The next call comes from Mary Lou in Lebanon, Tennessee, on our Republican line. Representative Hakeem Jeffries is our guest. Mary Lou, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, the Senate Judiciary Committee with the FBI oversight. Grassley didn't even ask Mueller one certain question that he should have asked. Robert Mueller said Wednesday they had 1,000 threats in Boston. So why would they allow the marathon if they were so concerned about Americans? In fact, I didn't even hear any of the people in the FBI oversight people ask that. And not only that, there are Mexicans who are unlicensed, driving vehicles, switching license plates and stuff. I've even seen people in my own town doing that. And when they get into an accident, a lot of people, a lot of Americans are not being compensated for that because of it. And the businesses, I mean, normal businesses everywhere are hiring these Mexicans. They don't care.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Mary Lou, Congressman, anything you'd like to respond to?
Well, first of all, you know, there are undocumented Americans who come to this country from all over the world. They come to this country to pursue the American dream, often leaving behind difficult economic circumstances. We certainly have to make sure that everyone who is in this country, both citizens and legal residents and undocumented Americans who will be transitioning hopefully towards citizenship, comply with the law, don't have a criminal background, are committed to making sure we uphold the values that are important to us in this country, as I believe the overwhelming majority of people who are here without authorization are committed toward doing. And I think I'll leave it at that, other than to say at the House Judiciary Committee with the FBI director, several people did ask him about the Boston situation. We obviously should learn from it the things that could have been done that were not done to make sure that we can best fend off this type of domestic terrorism in the future.
Representative Jeffries is also a member of the Budget Committee, and this week Ben Bernanke held his press conference. John Hilsenrath of the Wall Street Journal asked him a question, and the answer reflected back on Congress. I want to get your response to what Fed Chair Bernanke had to say.
It's the case that the Fed has overestimated the economy's growth rate very often in the past during this recovery. So, and we've gone through a period in the first half of the year with pretty subdued growth. So I would like to hear you explain where this optimism comes from and how confident you are that these expectations are going to be met.
Well, the fundamentals look a little better to us. In particular, the housing sector, which has been a drag on growth since the crisis, is now obviously a support to growth. It's not only creating construction jobs, but as house prices rise, increased household wealth, supports consumption spending, consumer sentiment. State and local governments, who have been a major drag, are now coming to a position where they no longer have to lay off large numbers of workers. Generally speaking, financial conditions are improving.
Consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Unanimous consent to speak in morning business for up to 12 minutes.
Without objection.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. Mr. President, that's the language of the Declaration of Independence. One of the grievances against King George III, in the immortal words of Thomas Jefferson, was limitations on immigration, endeavoring to prevent the population of these states. That was an original formation an original idea at the heart of the United States. Looked at in the context of our history, this debate that we're having this week is somewhat disappointing but not surprising. It's serious in its particulars, but it's amazing in its totality. Here we have a room full of descendants of immigrants arguing about the conditions of immigration. Sure, most of our ancestors in this room entered the country legally, but that was because there were virtually no laws about immigration for the majority of our history. For most of our history, if you could pay the cost, you could enter the country. That's the fundamental premise of America. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of people with courage, people with imagination, people with initiative, people with perseverance? Before coming to this body, I taught at Bowdoin College in Maine a course on leaders and leadership, and we attempted to define the qualities of leadership. And at the end of the course each year, we took an analysis of what we'd seen. And people with courage, imagination, initiative, and perseverance are leaders. Those are the people we want in this country. That's what it takes to come here. That's what it's taken to come here throughout our history. And why are they coming? They're coming for opportunity. They're coming for freedom. They're coming for a better life for their children, the same reason our ancestors came here. Isn't this what we all want? Opportunity, freedom, and a better life for our kids? Does this discussion affect the state of Maine? Well, yes, it does. We have migrants and immigrants picking our crops in northern Maine, blueberries and potatoes and broccoli. We have a vibrant refugee and asylum-seeking community in Portland, Maine, and in Lewiston. Many of those from Africa. They come here with very different cultures. We have 52 languages spoken in the Portland Public Schools. And yes, we have strains and difficulties adjusting one culture to another. But we're making it work, and it's making our state richer, spiritually, culturally, intellectually, and yes, financially. And it's working. But isn't this discussion all about amnesty? I keep hearing about amnesty. The mail I get says, don't let them get amnesty. No, it's not about amnesty. In my book, amnesty is a free pass. Amnesty is a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's a forgiveness. If you're convicted of, in Maine we call it OUI, other places call it DWI, if you're convicted of driving under the influence, you pay a fine, you lose your license, sometimes you spend a few days in jail, and you're under a suspension or a probationary period for several months or perhaps even several years. But when it's all over, when you've paid your fine, when you've had your suspension, you get your license back and you move on with your life and go from there. Nobody calls that amnesty when you get your license back at the end of that period after you've paid your debt to society. I would argue, Mr. President, that a fine, which is contained in this bill, and 13 years of what really constitutes probation is an amnesty. It's not amnesty in anybody's book. And people who are talking about and calling it amnesty, that's just not accurate. Why is this debate so important? Why is this issue so important? Why is this bill so important? In my view, immigration is the mainspring of America. It's our secret sauce. It's what has made us who we are. No other country in the history of the world has been built the way this country was built. Except for the African Americans who were brought here against their will and the Native Americans who were here when the Europeans arrived, everybody else here came by virtue of immigration. And that immigration has really, I believe, is what has separated us from the rest of the world. It's the constant flow of new energy, initiative, and ideas, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, and different creative energy that has really made this country what it is today. If we unduly limit it or cut it off, we're sunk. we're living in a negative demographic time bomb. Last year, I believe, for the first time in American history, we had more deaths than births. You don't have to be a mathematician to know that if that continues, we'll shrink and shrivel as a society. We need immigration to add to our population, to add to the ideas and creativity. What would we lose if we unduly limited immigration in this country? Well, I'm standing in the shoes of Olympia Snowe, the daughter of Greek immigrants. Before Olympia Snowe, the holder of this office was George Mitchell, the son of immigrants. Before George Mitchell, it was Ed Muskie, one of the great legislators of the 20th century in America, the son of an immigrant Polish tailor. And we have among our number now a brilliant young senator from Texas who himself is the son of an immigrant. Immigrants are always going to be different and a little scary, and that's been true throughout American history. We've had waves of immigrations: Italians, Germans, Scottish people, Chinese, Irish. And it's hard for us to believe, but a lot of the same sort of uneasiness about new immigrants was applied to those groups. In New York in the 1800s, if you went to apply for a job, there might be a sign in the window of the store that said, "Employees needed, jobs available," and then in parentheses it said in big letters, NINA, N-I-N-A. NINA stood for No Irish Need Apply. So uneasiness and fear and, yes, some prejudice against immigrants has been a part of our history. But in the end, those people are the very people who have built this country, literally, and who have made this country what it is. It's who we are. Now, there's also talk I've heard about wages and how all these new people are going to depress wages. And indeed, a couple of weeks ago, I had a meeting on my schedule in Maine with the union group, and all it said was, union group to discuss immigration. And I looked at it and I said, uh-oh, these folks are going to be worried about wages. And they're going to tell me this is a bad idea. Just the opposite. What they said was, we support the bill, Senator. We want immigration reform because now we've got millions of people in this country who are in the shadows, who don't have the benefits of the labor protections, and that's what's drawing wages down. That's what's providing a downward motion on wages and benefits. When an employer knows that he or she has that kind of leverage over an employee, if you don't take the low salary or sometimes no salary at all, I'm going to report you, you're gone, you're going to be deported. That's an inherently uneven and unfair playing field. And that's why I believe, and I think the CBO report has confirmed, that fixing this problem, putting the people that are here on a path, on a pathway and, to earn citizenship, will actually be a gigantic stimulus to our country. So what we're doing here is very important. And yes, I know we need controls. We need border controls. We need to control terrorism and criminals coming into our country. And yes, I know that we shouldn't reward breaking the law. But 13 years of probation and a fine is not rewarding lawbreaking. And again, we have to ask, why did these people break the law? They broke the law for the same reason that our ancestors came here, and the only reason they didn't break the law was that there was no law to break at that time. But they came here for opportunity and for a better life for their children. I've quoted Mark Twain before on this floor, and I will probably do so repeatedly again because he captures so many thoughts so succinctly. And in this case, what he said was, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it usually rhymes. This discussion that we're having here today is nothing new in American history. It's arisen time after time. And it arose in the 1840s and 1850s when indeed a whole political party came up that was designed to keep people out. It was called the Know Nothing Party. The reason it was called that was people asked the members of the party, well, what do you stand for? And they'd say, well, I don't know anything about that, because they didn't really want to talk about it. But it was anti-foreigner and anti-Catholic. And it was designed to lock in the ethnic and cultural society as it stood in 1850. Abraham Lincoln was asked when he was a member of the Illinois legislature — I wish he'd been a member of the Maine legislature, but I have to concede him to Illinois — he was asked how he felt about the know-nothings and whether he, in fact, was a know-nothing. Here's what he said: "I am not a know-nothing," Lincoln wrote. "How could I be? How could anyone who abhors the oppression of Negroes be in favor of degrading other classes of white people? Our progress in degeneracy appears to me to be pretty rapid. As a nation, we began by declaring all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. With the know-nothings in charge, it will read all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics." Lincoln ended pretty toughly. He said, "When it comes to this, I should prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia, for example, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy." Now, I'm not suggesting hypocrisy on the part of the people that are debating this bill, but I do think this is not a new debate. And we can't fear new people coming into our country. I believe this bill represents a fair-minded resolution of the current conflict over immigration. Control of the border to stem the tide of illegal immigration, penalties applied to those who broke the law, but an opportunity to earn citizenship after paying the penalty and a lengthy period of what amounts to probation. I don't think this debate, Mr. President, is about fences and fines and learning English. It's about America itself. Confusing, chaotic, creative, at times unsettling, but always erring on the side of freedom and opportunity. We have young people coming to this country who want and will achieve an education, and then we send them home. In my view, Mr. President, we should staple a green card to every diploma of every foreign student the moment they walk out of that, walk through that graduation line, so they can bring their ideas and creativity to our society. The constant infusion of new blood, new people, and new ideas isn't a threat, Mr. President. It's who we are. And it's what made us what we are. Again, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, it made us what we are, the last best hope of earth. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. President.
And whip.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd ask notice from the chair after I'm expended 10 minutes of my 12-minute time, so I know I have a couple minutes remaining, please. Mr. President, I've been here several times over the last couple of weeks to talk about my...
The senator has 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Thank you. I'd like to get a 2-minute notice, please.
The senator will be notified.
Mr. President, I've been here numerous times over the last couple of weeks to talk about why the essential bargain that needs to underlie this bill has to be one that's not based on phony promises like the ones that have been made in the past about restoring legality and order to our broken immigration system. It actually needs to be on a mechanism that will compel results and realign all of the incentives for people across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats alike, to make sure that Congress and the executive branch in particular keep their promises when it comes to border security. That's what my amendment's about, and that's what we'll be voting on here perhaps in the next half hour. The underlying metrics that are contained in my amendment are derived from those in the underlying bill. 100% situational awareness and 90% apprehension. Now, some people may question that and say, well, how can you have 100% situational awareness? Well, the fact of the matter is, using the technology that's currently deployed in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, technology like that was featured in a Los Angeles Times article a few weeks ago called the VADAR, V-A-D-A-R, a type of radar that was being pilot tested in the western part of our country, western part of the border, we can do a comprehensive job of seeing the border. I'm not talking about a Border Patrol agent seeing 3 people coming across the border and he doesn't see a handful of others who scamper across in some other place. I'm not talking about that sort of imprecision. I'm talking about using the technology that's available, like that, for example, of AT&T recently came in and demonstrated in my office the use of fiber optic cable to create, in essence, an acoustic system which will identify people crossing the border and which then will trigger cameras to focus on the individual coming across, to make sure it's not a deer or a javelina, that it is actually what the Border Patrol should be focused on, that has people crossing the border illegally. They could basically lay that cable down the entire U.S.-Mexico border for, I think they told me, somewhere on the order of $80 million. It's a lot of money, but it's not too much when it comes to securing our border. Likewise, I mentioned the Vader technology. I know that there are fixed towers and radar systems and camera systems that are being used by the military that need to be used by the Department of Homeland Security when it comes to protecting our border and keeping our commitments to keeping America safe. There are dirigibles, I would call them, blimps, that are used successfully in places like Afghanistan and which provide an ability to see for a huge stretch of the border, using, again, radar and cameras. So this idea of situational awareness, that that's somehow not possible, simply ignores the technological advances that have been made and deployed by our United States military in Afghanistan and Iraq, which could be deployed if we had the political will to make it happen along the southwestern border. And I don't think it's too much to ask of the people you actually see that the Border Patrol ought to detain 90%. Right now, according to the General Accountability Office, 2011, our border is only 45% under operational control, 45%. So that means if you do the rough arithmetic, out of the 350,000 people who were detained coming across our border last year, maybe the Border Patrol sees and detains half of the people. Maybe it's who knows what it is. We're guessing. We know what the numerator is, but we don't know what the denominator is. So we need to deploy the technology and assets we have in order to meet that goal. And again, I would refer to the New York Times article I talked about a moment ago, June 19th, headline, 2 GOP senators are close to a deal on border security. This refers to the efforts of my colleagues, our colleagues, Senator Corker and Senator Hoeven, and I have applauded them publicly, and I'll do so again, in making sure under their agreement, which we have not yet seen, and we understand we'll see language maybe tonight, they've helped make sure that we focus more assets on the border security issue, and they've added, I think, very constructively to this process. But the problem, I think, and we'll have to wait until we see the language, is that under this pending agreement, it says they've agreed to make the 90% apprehension rate a goal rather than a requirement. A goal. Well, the American people will not be fooled when Congress says to the American people on something as important as border security, trust us. You know, it reminds me of the old sort of lame joke that the most feared words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. What we're saying, in essence, on border security is, we're from the government, trust us, we have an aspirational goal to actually secure the border, but you have no guarantee that it will be done. That's why my amendment is so important, because what it does, it doesn't create any sort of punitive effect, but what it does is it realigns all of the incentives for people across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats alike, to make sure that the executive branch and the bureaucracy keeps its commitments when it comes to border security. Then, I believe, the American people demonstrating their typical generosity and compassion will say, yes, we need to find a humane way to deal with the 11 million people who are here. Mr. President, I have a sheet in front of me that entitled, What Are They Saying About Border Security Metrics? And this sheet has excerpts from a number of experts in the border security area that talks about the importance not just of measuring inputs, how many border patrol, how many drones, how many radar, I call those inputs. What they say is you actually need outputs, you need results, and you need metrics or measuring sticks to be able to show that you're making progress toward the intended goal. And Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that this document citing these experts be made part of the record at the end of my remarks.